Um, the recording is in progress now. Let me see. I'm going to make sure this works. All right. Um, today I'm going to be talking about Eleanor Gibson. And as Eleanor has said, we are here to remember and honor Eleanor. So I'm not going to be making uh, a lot of innovative claims about her work because I thought it was not the occasion for me to say what I think about some of the things she did, but more something as to remember what she did, right? So I'm going to be kind of telling a story about her life and the different contributions she made to ecological psychology. Through that, of course, there's going to be a little bit of hermeneutics, right? So I'm going to provide a little bit of my vision on it, but the focus should be her and not my hypothesis about her, so to speak, right? So that's why I'm going to try to reduce the hypothesis to the minimum and more kind of to explore the development of Eleanor's ideas and how they impacted ecological psychology. So to do so, I'm going to first talk a little bit about her life in general, and then I'm going to kind of make zoom into three moments or three aspects of her academic life. We are going to talk about her in terms of she being a behaviorist, but also she being a developmental psychologist, and at the end, she as an ecological psychologist. So first, let's talk a little bit about her life. Um, Eleanor Jack, that afterwards would be Eleanor Gibson, was born in on December 7th, 114 years ago in Illinois. He was always had the nickname, or since college at least, he had the nickname of Jackie. And still, when you talk to people that met her and met her husband James Gibson, they still call them like Jimmy and Jackie. So that kind of stayed with her for her whole life. As I said, her husband was James Gibson, and that was an important aspect of her life, or as together they developed the ecological approach. But they were never kind of an academic power couple who published a lot together. But they did a few things that were relevant and that has a long-lasting influence in the field. I think one of the main things about her academic life is that she suffered from gender discrimination for the whole life. Like we will see some instances of it as we go. But despite that, she became a leading figure in the psychology of development and learning. As a caveat, I've also tried to to avoid the romanticization of her success. So it's quite easy to picture this in terms of, oh yeah, gender discrimination, but she overcame it and then became a successful figure, which is true. But it's kind of the romantic story of the hero who overcomes bad bad conditions that often ends up in not paying attention to the conditions themselves. So I'm trying to highlight that the gender discrimination was there the whole time and is likely still there in our current academia, even if she was able to in the end be a successful scholar, right? So as we are interested in her academic life, I think it started when she moved to Smith College. She moved there at the age of 16, and she was actually thinking about studying languages. I don't know if English or any other, but somehow she ended up studying experimental psychology and getting a master's in experimental psychology in 1933, um, at the age of 23. During that time, James Gibson was a professor there, and they met and married. She was an instructor in at Smith College from 1932 to 1949, in and out, because as we will see, she went out for some years, but during this period of 17 years, she was an instructor there. So the first time she went out, it was in 1935 when she moved to Yale University to get her PhD in experimental psychology. And she actually first asked Robert Yerkes, I think, to be her advisor, and he refused. He refused because he wouldn't take women as a student. Actually, she talks about this event, and first it it was very difficult for her to get an appointment with him, and when she did, he was very rude, and it lasted like 15 seconds or something like that, right? So, um, luckily enough, Clark Hall was also a professor in the psychology department at Yale at the time, and he accepted her as a student. So she ended up doing her PhD in some of the within the framework Clark Hall was developing, and she did it on generalization and differentiation in verbal learning. We will talk a little bit about it um, as we go. So after her PhD that she got in 1938. Although she moved back to be an instructor at Smith College a little bit earlier than that, but she got the PhD in 1938, and she continued being an instructor at Smith College until in 1941, James Gibson was recruited by the U.S. Air Force to serve as a trainer of pilots for World War II. So they moved together and they spent like 5 years engaging in this activity. They were living in Texas, in California afterwards, and some of the ecological ideas actually started developing uh, around this time, right? Um, Eleanor was more focused on her family at that time, but she continued being one of the intellectual companions of James Gibson while he was doing this task of trying to develop resources to help pilots to learn how to land and that kind of stuff, right? Um, After this time, they came back to Smith College in 1946, but once again they left um, in 1949 when James Gibson joined, when James Gibson accepted a job at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. So you can see how in there are not only the gender discrimination was institutional, but there's kind of a gender role in which she was following James in life. And actually, when she moved to Cornell, she didn't get a permanent job until 1966. So she was like 17 years without a permanent job there. I mean, um, for all of you who are in academia, you can imagine how difficult that must be, right? She needed to work as a research associate at different labs in Cornell, and often non-paid jobs or just depending on grants she was winning, that kind of stuff, right? But not real security or not real job security until 1966. It was during this time, though, during the years at Cornell University, in which many things happened, right? During the 50s, she and James Gibson developed or first proposed the differentiation theory of perceptual learning. He did her work on the visual cliff. She wrote books, etc. So we will see some of that as we focus more on the academic achievements. Um, but yeah, she left Cornell in 1979 after James Gibson died. And since then to 2002, she visited many universities and received a lot of awards. So by the end of her life, kind of the psychological community, at least in North America, was starting to acknowledge her importance. She died on December 30th in 2002. And when she died was already regarded as one of the most relevant psychologists of the 20th century. Just to give you an example, the APA, the American Psychological Association, published kind of a list of eminent 20th century psychologists, the 100 most eminent psychologists. And while James Gibson features in position 88, Eleanor features in position 74. So according to the American Psychological Association, Eleanor was more eminent than than James, even while during their lives this didn't reflect in jobs and in recognition, right? So this is kind of a very fast way through Eleanor's life. I just want to point out that she published um, 5 books, a lot of articles too, right? But she published the principles of perceptual learning and development in 1969. Then a book on the psychology of learning. Then approaching the 2000s, she published an ecological approach to perceptual learning and development. Then she has an Odyssey in learning and perception, which is a set of essays, and at the end, the last book is an autobiography that for her and for James Gibson, that is called "Perceiving the Affordances." Um, it is a fantastic book. It is a quite sad book too. So if you ever plan to read it, it's cool but sad in some ways. So this is kind of as I said, like fast uh, view of Eleanor's life, but I think we can now get into the science, right? So first, I want to talk about Eleanor Gibson as a behaviorist because in general, she and James Gibson felt themselves as some sort of behaviorists during their whole life. There are many reasons for that, and of course, they didn't think of themselves in terms of mainstream behaviorism, but there's some aspects there, and of course, this thing with her starts not only through the influence of James Gibson, that was her psychology professor too, but also during her PhD with Clark Hall, who was an also well-known behaviorist that was trying to do again. that has a very particular approach to behaviorism that was based in kind of two main ideas. Like she was trying to find lawful explanations of behavior, and if you go to his publication, he has this famous um, formula in which a response depends on a stimulus and some other aspects of it, like some forms of inhibition and habit and some other things. But he was always kind of trying to find this formula or this formulaic approach to behavior that needed to come from first principles or action. So he was hoping to have a kind of purely deductive psychological science, inspired, of course, by mathematics and physics, right? Um, and during her PhD, Eleanor took some of these first principles, two of them actually, generalization and differentiation, to try to explain verbal behavior. Um, when she talks about generalization, she defines it as the tendency for a response RA, learn to an stimulus SA, to occur when a different stimulus SB is presented. So basically, once in a typical conditioning context, you learn to respond to a particular stimulus, you tend to generalize that response to other stimuli, right? That's kind of a pattern, kind of a law or a principle that happens when we learn. Actually, one thing that is very well known is the overgeneralization of some verbal patterns, right? So this was one of the things she thought one of the principles that could help to understand how we learn verbs. Like in the figure here, you have different associations so between stimuli S and responses R. So the dashed lines are there to represent the different patterns of generalization from some stimuli to other responses that are not conditioned on it, right? But other than generalization, she was also talking about the differentiation, right? That which is this progressive decrease in generalization as a result of a reinforced practice between some stimuli and some response, and a non-reinforced presentation of a different stimulus. So the idea is that we learned through generalizing some responses as we are, and as we do that, we are exposed to more and more stimuli, we are able to differentiate between them, uh, therefore avoiding overgeneralization, etc., and other issues, right? So she took these two principles um, to try to understand verbal learning. She was quite happy about it, and she kind of um says that she felt that she was able to humanize the concepts because these concepts in whole were still kind of abstract things, and she was able to put them to work in in functional terms, in terms of human behavior, right? So she was able to explore the development of human behavior. In this case, the way we learned a language, right? With these two concepts. Um, if you read the main papers in which she develops this kind of strategy, you can still see the influence of Hall's approach there. She especially a paper in 1940, um, in which she provides a systematic approach to generalization and differentiation. She has like definitions, postulates, hypotheses, right? So it's kind of very deductive structure even in the paper. But I think the most interesting part of this is um, how she highlighted the importance of differentiation as kind of the main mechanism to learn stuff. Um, and we will see. Keep this in mind. The differentiation was already in her PhD, and it's going to play a very important role when we talk about ecological learning. But she said the value of emphasizing discrimination as a factor in verbal learning seems unquestionable, and that generalization and differentiation are concepts suitable for its systematic development seems almost as likely. So she was already thinking of some form of differentiation, or in this case, discrimination, as a living force in our learning behaviors, right? So we can say that as a behaviorist, she took this concept with her, right? This differentiation as one of the main drivers of stuff. But as I said, after she did her PhD, she came back to Smith College as an instructor for a few years, and then she moved to Cornell, and she had no stable job there, right? Uh, so she worked as an associate researcher in different labs, sometimes funded by grants, sometimes with no funding, right? And the first lab she worked was Professor Little lab called the behavior form. And she worked with little goats, actually. She was quite happy about it because she wanted to work with animals. There you see a picture of her with a little goat and with the two kids. So uh, when she was working with goats, she was interested in the chemical bonding at birth, right? So when a little goat is born, and I'm talking about this anecdote just to be able to put a picture of a little goat there. Um, um, you know, the mother and the kid needs some kind of chemical interaction, like licking and that stuff that forms the first bonding between them. So she was kind of waiting for the birth of twins to try to manipulate that, right? So what she did is that she removed the first kid, right? And as she explains, she removed the first kid from the mother before she could lick it and before the afterbirth appeared. The kid was immediately bathed in a detergent, and on one occasion, uh, I had just, she says, I had just completed the first kid's bath when its twin began to make an appearance. What to do in a hurry with the freshly bathed one? The farm manager, watching from a half door, said, "Put it on the stand." And that stand was a very high camera stand with a pedestal about a foot square. I, Eleanor said, I protested that it would fall off, but he assured me that it would not, right? So she was afraid that the little goat would fall from the stand, But the manager, who has probably seen a lot of way more goats than her, said no worries. Um, so she continues. I stooped the damn little animal on the stand, and there it remained upright, looking around the room until I could carry it off to its assigned place. Goats, she continues, are prepared from birth to survive on a precipice, and this lesson was good preparation for the visual cliff experiment conducted a few years later. So it is interesting because during her time at the behavior farm, she got the insight for her most famous experiment, right? So, but she did more things if you think about it. First, this is where she started actually working for real in developmental psychology. She had always been interested in learning, but this was the first step, the first time she was working with babies, actually. So she was actually doing a developmental approach. Also, like my fellow Miguel Segundo says, this is where she started doing comparative psychology too, right? Because she was forced to, in some ways, right? She didn't have a job, so she needed to work in this lab that accepted her, and she started doing this too. And of course, uh, she got the inspiration for the visual cliff paradigm. So um, it was kind of a productive time in the behavior farm lab, but most of Eleanor's experimental subjects were given away during Easter. So all it seems like in that lab during Easter they used to give away the little goats, which is a fun thing, and I'm sure the families who got the goats were super happy. But actually, and she says that her experiment was ruined. So she didn't have any experimental subjects anymore. So she left the lab, and then she moved to to a lab that was called the Perceptual and Motor Skill Lab, and that was also related with the army. It was near Cornell, but it had some funding there. I think this lab is kind of the origin of the airport. The airport being the famous James Gibson and Eleanor Gibson's lab at Cornell. The thing is that she moved back to this lab to work back in learning. But in this case, perceptual learning. And this is when she and James came up with the idea of identification learning. They kind of had these scribbles you see on the picture there, and they did experiments to see how the participants were able to differentiate them, right? So they were already approaching perceptual learning in terms of differentiation. That, remember, is a concept she carries from her time in jail during her PhD. And this is the fundamental precedent of the ecological theory of perceptual learning and development. And she was quite aware of that. She claims that our hypothesis was that the learner had to narrow down a mass of stimulus information until only that which uniquely specified a particular item remained. A process of differentiation. This process might especially coincide with and characterize development. So she was already thinking this is the key for learning and development. And this is kind of the main claim I want to make here is this is a key that she brought from her own work, right? So, but she then moved to a third lab, which was to work with Richard Walk, who used to work with rodents, but she was already thinking about goats not falling, and she was wanting to work with enriched environments because think about it, an enriched environment is what you need if you want a process of differentiation. If there's only one thing in your environment, there are not many things to differentiate, right? But that was kind of in her mind, and the experiment in the visual cliff started, or the experiment with the visual cliff. The visual cliff experiment was this kind of experimental setup that you see on the picture there, in which you have kind of a table or a space with a shallow part, which is the part where the baby is on top, and then a deeper part, but there's glass there, so babies don't fall. And the main idea is that one of the parents stays on the other side of that glass and calls the baby, and then you need to see whether the baby would be able to perceive the cliff or not, right? And they did this with not only human babies but also other animals there, right? So uh, they wanted to test whether depth perception was inherent or was learned. And what what they saw is that human babies at least used to cross the glass part, right? At some point. Uh, uh, it was not fully innate as it seems to be the case of goats, right? The goat in that stand didn't fall. It seems that these babies could fall. But more interestingly, they observed that it was very tied to the development of locomotion, of crawling, and that stuff. So they were able to see how action was one of the main things the babies need to actually perceive a cliff or depth in that case. This experiment was very famous at that time. Actually, like it appeared in Scientific American and that kind of science communication stuff, and it's a paradigm that is still alive in some ways. Maybe not the cliff itself, but this idea of enriched environments for babies to kind of really act. It's still a way to, or kind of one of the main ways to approach developmental psychology, right? So this clip showed that, as I said, there's a way to study behavior with enriched environments. Uh, it's also a way to do comparative psychology because you can compare goats to rodents, to babies, to cats. It seems to me, if I remember well, that babies and cats are the ones that actually need more time to perceive depth in that case. But also shows the tight relationship between perception and action, as the perception of death was tied to the ability to locomote, right? And all this uh, lead us to ecological psychology. So, what are the things that she was bringing to the ecological approach? So, there's a thing, and this is the only James Gibson's quote I'm going to use here because I wanted to focus on Eleanor. But we should remember that they were doing the approach together explicitly, actually. Gibson says, this whole inquiry has been shared for years with Eleanor Gibson, my wife. In 1963, however, we divided the problems between us, and she was concentrated on perceptual learning and development while I was concentrated on the senses. Her forthcoming book, which is the 1969 book, will take up the story where mine leaves off, right? So it was their project, although we tend to assign it only to James, right? But kind of perhaps the main thing they did together and the main contribution I would say Eleanor did to the theory uh, was this idea of perceptual learning based on differentiation, which remember comes I think from her time with Hall during her PhD, right? So basically, what James Gibson and Eleanor Gibson claim in their famous 1955 paper, in which they propose this theory, is that when we get to talk about perceptual learning, there are basically two sets of theories or two ways to go. The enrichment theories that are those that think that perceptual learning consists in adding information to meager sensations, or differentiation that take perceptual learnings to consist in differentiating previously vague impressions. So, in the enrichment theories, the starting point are bundles of simple sensations that you get through your eyes or your ears or you know and then just through experience those simple sensations are enriched with previous experiences, so with memories. And through enriching the maybe not very informative, simple sensations with memories, with what we know from previous experiences, we basically get to learn a new thing, perceptually speaking. So perceptual learning is itself the outcome of this enrichment process. Uh, this is what they take to be the standard, right? And this is kind of the still the standard within the mainstream approach in some ways. Uh, However, differentiation theories, which is the kind of theory they are proposing in this paper, for these theories, the starting point is rich perceptual information. Uh, that is, a specific information in the case of ecological psychology. And now I need to do a detour because I need to at least say a few things about what this thing is, right? So, uh, one of the core tenets of ecological psychology is what we can call the information hypothesis. That basically says that for every perceivable property of the environment, however subtle, there must be a higher order variable of information, however complex, that specifies it. um, and these high order variables of information are patterns of the stimulation flows that are what we call ecological information, right? Is this rich uh, um, pattern? So we take a stimulation to be this rich array full of patterns that inform us about the state of our environment. And ecological information is described in terms of these high order patterns that surround us. Two simple example. How can we know that all the white columns here are of the same height? Well, there's a very particular pattern there, which is the horizon line cuts all of them at the same ratio BA, right? All of them, even though they appear differently in our visual field, all of them are cut by the horizon at the same ratio. So this is the horizon ratio invariant, which inform us about the height of all the columns there. And another example is that as we move around all the surfaces or all the solid angles that we get from the surfaces around us change lawfully with the way we move, right? So when I say the starting point is rich perceptual information, what I say is that the starting point is not bundles of simple sensations, but these kind of high order patterns of stimulation. And through experience, we are able to identify and to differentiate and to discriminate more and more of those patterns. And perceptual learning is the outcome of this differentiation process. So we don't put memories into simple sensations until we make them meaningful, but we get access to this rich set of patterns that surround us, and we learn to discriminate them. Uh, uh, this is kind of the main theory uh, of perceptual learning and development in the ecological approach, but I think it goes beyond that because what differentiation provide us is not just with a way to to understand learning and development, but it provides perception with a dynamic character. As we live surrounded by this rich arrays of information, we can change how we perceive as we explore them, as we differentiate them. And actually, this gives you a clear connection between perception and action in terms of exploration, right? We explore for many reasons, but one of the reasons is actually differentiation, right? To be able to pick up different patterns. But also, of course, it gives you the, kind of the main driver of learning and development, both in Eleanor's theory, but also in more recent theories of 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 ecological psychologists regarding learning and development, like the direct learning one that Jacobs and Michaels were proposing a few years ago, in which you see that you see how you kind of go from invariant, from pattern to pattern until you find the right one. And this might be controversial a little bit, but kind of help ecological psychologists to escape from an accusation of sorry of in innate powers. Like you can see if you read Donald Hebb's book, The Organization of Behavior. It's a 1948 book in which he first talks about cell assemblies and Hebbian learning and that stuff. And when he reviews previous theories on how we perceive, he says that the Gestalt theory is an theory. It's, I mean, falls in the realm of of innate theories because they don't build up knowledge out of experience, but they kind of claim that we from the very beginning have these gestalts, right? And if you don't have a way to explain how those gestalt appears, one way to look at it is that they are innate, like the goat that doesn't fall, right? But with differentiation, ecological psychologists can claim, no, it's not that we have innate powers to detect this pattern. No, it's like these patterns are out there, and we just explore our environment, and through experience, actually, we are able to differentiate them. So again, I think differentiations in terms of theory is the main contribution Eleanor Gibson provides to the ecological approach. Um, and I think it goes even beyond learning and development in all the ways I've been trying to name here. But also in terms of methods, the visual cliff paradigm is a clear example of an enriched experimental environment with variations used still now. And actually, this work and this experimental approach and other experimental approach that Eleanor developed is basically one of the two experimental research paradigms within the ecological approach. We have a lot of theory, but when it comes to to experimental research lines that are still active and going on, the so to speak, the heirs of Eleanor are one of them, right? People like Karen Adolf and others, right? So I think it is quite clear that Eleanor gave ecological psychology many conceptual stuff, and especially this notion of differentiation, but also she was there putting the methods of the approach forward too. So I just want to make a couple of final remarks here. I think that the life and career of Eleanor is a testament to brilliance, but also to the effects of discrimination in academia. Uh, Imagine she had the opportunity to have a permanent job with more students, right? With more security there. We now we would have more generations of Eleanor's PhDs, etc. Right? So it would be a good thing that we didn't have just because of this crimination. Uh, and yeah, I mean, and even with that, she was brilliant and she did it, right? She made it. But we shouldn't, I think we should avoid the romanticization of that, right? So she did it, but it would have been even better without this crimination part. And also, I think as a community, we ecological psychologists are still in some kind of debt with them. Like Miguel Segundo and I wrote this short book on ecological psychology, and one of our main ideas was to feature Eleanor as she deserves to be featured in the history and in the development of the approach. I think this is something lacking from our approach in general. It's very common to see Eleanor's work ignored in the textbooks, introductions, and other works. And I think we the best way to remember and to honor her is to give her her rightful position in the approach. And that's all. I hope you've enjoyed our little trip through Eleanor's life, and that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vicente, for the talk. If anyone has questions, we can have them. You can raise the hand. You can press the hand button, and Vicente, you can take the questions.
Okay.
I'm checking if anyone has some questions.
Let's stop this. for a second.
Yeah, there is one.
Uh,
Yeah. Thank you so much for this amazing talk. I just have one question. There were actually a lot of questions through the talk, but I felt like this is the major one. Is there any criticism towards ecological psychology? I am not, it was my first time hearing about ecological psychology theory, and I am from developmental psychology area, and currently there is a lot of discussion in terms of natural environments versus experimental designs in the lab. So whether this is something that is related to that, I was thinking. So, for example, it's I don't know, some studies are criticized like when they are run in the experimental when they are run in the labs using experimental designs, just like this visual cliff paradigm. Whereas at the moment, more like ecological studies with more ecological validity is suggested. So I wonder whether what you think about that. Sorry, that's a long question.
no, it's a very interesting question. Um, Ecological psychology is indeed a very minoritary approach, right? So it's like only a few tens of people are doing it. But yeah, I mean, in general, I think that although ecological psychologists are not the only ones who are doing this, but there's general tendency towards more naturalistic environments, naturalistic stimulation, right? Uh, and even to design tasks that include naturalistic behavior too, right? Like not just having a participant clicking yes, no to a thing, right? No, trying to have more real or natural bits of behavior in the lab. Um, Ecological psychologists are for sure part of this camp, so part of this group of people that are trying to do that. Again, not the only ones. You have people trying to do, for instance, mobile brain imaging, and they are trying to do exactly the same thing, right? Trying to include actual behavior in brain imaging paradigms, or other people trying to do the same for fMRI and for other studies, right? So in general, ecological psychologists are on this camp on trying to make the lab as similar to real life as we can, right? This has, I would say, obvious benefits in terms like you are able to generalize the or hopefully you are able to generalize the things that you find in the lab on a wider scale and that stuff. But at the same time, of course, it has some issues, right? Like the more natural the environment is, the more issues you have with controlling it, right? So there's always this trade-off between what how natural your experimental setup can be and the degree of control you need as to then be able to do an analysis that informs you about the aspects of that environment that you are interested in. This is obviously an open question. Ecological psychologists are trying to do this from a very particular set of ideas that are actually rejected by most people in the field. But yeah, that's the aim at the end. And actually, I could say that even the people that are very concerned about naturalistic stimulation or having more natural behaviors because they are more difficult to control. I would say that even those people would agree that having more natural behaviors and more natural stimulation when possible is a good thing, right? So so yeah, this is a trade-off. and I think we all are trying to improve on it.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Thank you.
If we have more questions, we have time, so feel free to raise your hand. Uh, yes, Robin.
Hi, thank you so much. Hi, thank you so much for that talk. I was wondering, like, first of all, thank you so much for kind of centering Eleanor's work um, within the field and the importance of her work within the field of psychology. Um, and my question is, like, you did such a beautiful job of like kind of telling the story of her life and of her career. And you highlighted this notion of differentiation and perceptual learning as one of um, the main, contributions that she had, at least like theoretically and conceptually to the field. And you mentioned that you felt that it goes beyond just like perceptual learning and development. Because I think a lot of, and you hinted at this, a lot of the reason why, you know, a lot of our work hasn't been taken, quote unquote, as seriously is because it's seen as developmental work, which even within psychology research in general, developmental work is often looked down on as less important. Although, sorry, I'm going on rant now. Although it would be argued if you're interested in understanding why we think the way we think and behave the way we do, any explanation requires you to explain how that developed in the first place. But regardless, I'm hoping that you could share more details about how you believe that this notion of differentiation has impacted other research within the field beyond developmental research.
Yeah, so I think that one of the main aspects of ecological psychology has to do with the tight relationship between perception and action. And if you read it in James Gibson's work, he talks about exploration a lot, right? Um, but exploration, in the end, uh, can be driven by differentiation, right? So when you when you explore your environment, among other things, what you are doing is you gather more information by discriminating better the things that there are or not, right? To have access to a different point of observation, to have access to a different invariant, right? To discriminate from what they say, from that mass of things to the particular invariant that specifies the aspect of interest in the environment. So, in some way, what we do when we explore is gathering in order to discriminate, and this goes beyond learning as such, or to perceive is intrinsically related to learn about the environment in some sense, right? So here, of course, we are using maybe learning in two slightly different ways. One thing is how you learn to detect the right variable, right? That is, I think, what Eleanor and James Gibson have in mind when they talk about differentiation, right? It's like within the same situation, you you polish your or maybe not polish. That's not the word, but you are able to attune to a better and better stimulation. But there's a different way in which you learn about your environment, which is like moving around and getting new things, right? This doesn't exactly means that you are attuned to better and better variables, but you are attuned to new variables, and this is a way that require exploration and differentiation in some way, right? So that's how I would the way I would think about it is that as we explore, we differentiate. That's one of the main drivers there, and goes for perception in general, and not just in these particular aspects of, oh no, in the same situation you are attuned to a better and better variable.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Do we have another question?
Sorry, is it possible to ask one more question? It's a
Yeah, of
quick
course.
one. Yeah, so just about this, when you were talking about the Donald Hubb's criticism towards just Gestalt psychology, so I just wanted to check whether I understand correctly. So this Hebbian rule, which comes to neuroplasticity, is it in a way supporting this differentiation concept, right? Because it's a differentiation is also dynamic. So when you learn something, those things that you learn is going to change how your brain wires, for example. So is that how differentiation and Hebb's rule is connected, or what was the connection there? Sorry.
Here I was thinking about Donald Hebb's idea that it's actually an interesting idea from our point of view. It's the idea that Gestalt psychology is a form of innatism. I would say that many people who enjoy Gestalt psychology nowadays would be surprised that they are accused of innatism. Um, so I was bringing Donald Hebb in because of that, because he was comparing a kind of empiricist enrichment theory in which you get simple sensations, and through previous experiences you end up having a percept that you know about, um, with Gestalt that says that the Gestalts are not built up that way, right? You perceive a group or a series or whatever, not because you start having simple sensations and through a process of experience you enrich it as to see a group, right? So he was kind of comparing his own theory based on standard empiricism in which you get simple stuff and you build up a mental image of some sorts. With the Gestalt one, that I say that you don't get simple stuff to build something up. Somehow, what you get is the Gestalt, and from the beginning, right? So Hebb thought that what Gestalt psychologists are saying is that we have the innate capacity to perceive gestalts. Therefore, gestalt psychology is a form of innatism. That's what Donald Hebb would say. As opposed to his own theory that would be empiricism. I think actually the differentiation theory, it's neither of them, right? It's not innate in any way. Actually, I would say that Gestalt psychologists would say, hey, we are not innatists either. We are talking about brain dynamics here, but that's a different thing. My point is that even if you accept Hebb's diagnostic, the differentiation theory is a third way, right? It's not Hebbian, but it's not innate either, right? It's a way in which you start with rich information, and basically through action you learn to differentiate it. But and it is maybe, through the process of differentiation, your brain changes following Hebbian rules or not. But at the core of it, uh, Hebb's idea uh, is 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 a form of an enrichment theory, and Eleanor's and James, or the ecological approach, uh, would not uh, could not be classified in that dichotomy between the Hebbian empiricism and Gestalt ignitism.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Do we have another question, or I will ask something? Hmm.
Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to actually say that because I wanted to ask something related to this innativism discussion. So I've been actually like I may have not understand the differentiation concept very well, of course, in that short time. However, I've been thinking about affordance perception and how we develop from the, um, perspective of developmental psychology, how we learn to perceive affordances. So when we say that, it sounds more like we have some skills or innate skills that help us perceive the affordances, but I know that this is completely out of question when it comes to ecological psychology. But I would love if you could like give more details on the relationship between the Eleanor Gibson's approach to, learning affordances throughout the development.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um, I think it is clear that we learn to perceive affordances and to act upon them, right? So and that process of learning requires not only having the right body and the right perceptual system, etc., but also to educate our attention, which is a form to differentiate, right? You educate where to attend, to what variable you attend, right? That's so you have to differentiate between all the possible variables and to be able to attend to the right one. And also, it involves the education of intention, to know what to do, to know the right thing. Like, I know that I shouldn't scream here, or I shouldn't jump into my table now, and that stuff. So, but at all these things involve, again, not only the right body, but the right behavior and the right the right normative environment, right? To know what to do, what not, etc. But at its core, what the notion of differentiation, or a differentiation theory of learning, what it says is that you have all these different variables out there, and you just need to be able to discriminate between them to find the right one for whatever you want to learn, right? Um, all these variables are variables of ecological information, and and at the core of ecological psychology is that ecological information specify affordances. So we detect ecological information, and by virtue of that detection, we know that the stair is climbable, or that the door is passable, right? So the process of differentiation allow us to find the variable that specify an affordance, right? So to know new affordances, or to discover them, or to learn them, is a process of uh, knowing what is the right information to detect. And this process is a process of differentiating of all the possible informational variables. So that's how the notion of differentiation features there, right? It's you differentiate between informational variables that specify different affordances in your environment.
Thank you so much. I think if it's okay for you, we can have one more question, maybe last one. Um,
No questions.
no questions, I guess. Yeah. Thank you
That's all
so
very.
much. Sorry?
It was all very clear, so there's no.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this inspiring speech, especially like the focus on Eleanor Gibson's journey, actually. I think it helps us to better understand the journey of a scientist, a woman scientist, and also I think it clears so much about the ecological psychology discussions as well. So I want to thank again. If we don't have any questions, we called for today. Thank you so much for the speech again.
Thank you.
Okay, have a nice day all. Thank you.